was going to start off by going to the beginning, and I think I'll start with Tom. So how did you become such an industry game changer? Where did your passion start?
Thanks for asking the question. For me, there's a little bit of background. I was born in Budapest, which was still communist when I was born there in the early 80s, and then landed in the United States for college, which is sort of the heartland of capitalism. I remember this great moment where it was Economics 101 at Princeton, first class at university, and the professor gets up on stage and asks the question, what is the purpose of business? And the answer that she was looking for was profit to shareholders. And to me, it felt, it was the right answer, right? The textbook answer, but it felt a bit uninspired. I really, thought business touches so many stakeholders, so many lives, customers, employees, vendors, and many other folks in the ecosystem. And most of those folks don't really care about profit to shareholders, nor are motivated by that in any way. So shouldn't profit be more of an indication of health, right? If you're very profitable, you're going to be around and grow. And if you're not profitable, you're going to, do the opposite. And that the goal of business is really, how does it help the environment or society or both be somehow better? And for me, that was a massive turning point. And I landed on the topic of waste, which is what, I've spent the past 20 years working on, simply because it's just a topic filled with so many anomalies. Everything in the world we possess will one day be legally owned by the garbage industry, and actually with no exception. The only question is when, not if. And for how big it is probably the least innovative industry per dollar of revenue that it captures. And a big part of that is we're repulsed by it. It is literally sort of stinky, smelly, poop, crap. All of that is quite literally, not metaphorically, the garbage industry. And so it just felt like an amazing place to purposefully innovate. And it hasn't disappointed.
Brilliant. Anna, over to you.
Well, I suppose for me, I would like to say that the sort of, for me to be kind of nominated as a game changer, I think is only really a reflection of the fact that I was lucky enough to be at The Guardian. And I think The Guardian sort of at its best exemplifies a purposeful organization. And it's impossible, I think, to be there and to want to stay there and to sort of kind of be able to lead there without believing in that purpose. And so therefore, in a sense, buying into that purpose and becoming purposeful yourself. And I totally agree with what Tom says, which in the sense that I think that the purpose really should be the North Star of any organization. And whereas perhaps before, reductively, it was about profit seeking, now I think those organizations can stand for something or have their North Star as something broader and more meaningful, which is kind of defined by their purpose. And I think that Tom is completely right, that purpose doesn't have to be in any way at the expense of profit. It can be absolutely in support of profit, and it be absolutely in support of the commercial kind of health of an organization. It helps with brand differentiation. It helps enormously with internal culture, with retention, with innovation. And it doesn't have to be pious, it kind of, and I think coming back to that idea of North Star, like, why are you there and what do you stand for? I think purpose becomes an aspiration and a way of making decisions and a way of kind of, sort of working out where you're trying to go and why you're trying to get there and how you're going to get there in the best way possible. And so I think that's how I became purposeful, really, by being within an organization where you could see the power of it and the power of it to unite people internally, but also kind of externally.
I think The Guardian were ahead of the time there with many businesses. And I think post-COVID, I think purposeful business is happening. So my next question would be rules of engagement around being a purposeful business, because I think a lot of people are talking a good game, but are they walking it? So I'll start with you, Anna, on that.
Well, I think the first thing is that it has to be authentic. And I think that your point that there are many organizations who see, in a sense, the superficial appeal of being purposeful, and in a way the brand appeal of being purposeful, without necessarily seeing the true need for it to be authentic to the organization. And I come back to this point that I don't think it has to be pious. It just has to be something, you have to stand for something, and you have to understand why you are there as an organization, and you have to be able to communicate that both internally and externally. And if you can answer that, you can sort of feel this sense of clarity around why you're there, then I think you can be purposeful and it can be helpful. So I think the first piece is authenticity. The second piece is sort of the acceptance that in most purposeful organizations, it's not an end point or a done deal. And that, again, you come back to this idea of a North Star. It's a direction of travel, and it's a clarifying objective and a way of doing business, in a sense, and a way of making decisions and answering sort of difficult challenges. And I think, you don't suddenly wake up one day and you are purposeful, nor do you suddenly go, well, we've just brilliantly communicated our purpose, job done. And I think that is the sort of the other kind of, I think, big rule of engagement, which is the understanding that, and I really don't want to say the word journey, but, it's an ongoing process, and it's an ongoing challenge. And in a sense that sort of setting out to be purposeful is about setting that objective, making sure that you can measure it, and a willingness to be transparent and hold yourself to account around that purpose. So those would be my starting points of rules of engagement.
Brilliant. Tom, what's your purpose rules?
Yeah, it's a great question. Just really to build on everything that Anna said, I think one of the interesting things about the word purpose is, every single organization has a purpose, right? The most basic sort of capitalist organization's purpose is to maximize profit to shareholders. That is objectively a purpose. And I think what we may want to think about is a distinction here in how we use the word purpose, not necessarily the dictionary definition, because every organization in that way would be purpose-driven. Is that purpose something that is outside the business context, right? So how does it help? The easiest areas would be, how does it help society, the human construct, or how does it help environment, plants and animals, or a combination? But these things that are creating value outside the general purpose of business, which is profit to its owners. Within that, I think, the area to think through, and this is, I think, a challenge for a lot of social businesses, is where do we really put the focus on that we're going to really lean in on that purpose, and then where do we say on everything else we're going to stay neutral or not have a point of view and do things in the normal way. And why I say this is sort of interesting for especially social or mission-driven businesses is that there many times can be this challenge, especially in the starting point, is that we try to be too purposeful on everything, and that creates paralysis on actually taking a step forward. So I don't think there's an absolutely right answer here. It is somewhat governed by the stakeholders that interact with your business, be it the media, be it customers, collaborators, whatever it may be. And they're going to give you a pretty good sense of whether you are being authentic to the purpose and even having a purpose that is easy to rally against. It's sort of like, the market gives you that feedback. And the market in a way also holds you accountable to a certain degree. So for us, and this is not to say this is the answer, this is just sort of an example, our purpose is to eliminate the idea of waste. So it's specific around how do we move from linear systems, where things are destined to be disposed, to collecting and recycling them, to reusing them, but effectively move linear systems to much more circular. That is the reason we exist in our purpose. Now, we focused it very carefully there. So for example, we do not make an opinion on what type of companies we work with as long as they are legal enterprises. So, we have clients that are big tobacco, big oil, big pharma. Now, other people, let's take big tobacco because that's a very black and white example, perhaps the most black and white. There are many companies whose purpose is to have big tobacco not exist. And that is a totally reasonable, purpose that should be celebrated and supported. And so you have the sort of, at least that's how we've tried to do this, to have a very clear focus on what is our purpose that we can be domain experts in, that we can be credible on, that we can really drive change. And then everything else we leave, to other actors, whether it be the law that sets things as being legal or not legal, and other actors to fight their own battles on. And hopefully, we can show that you can win on these sort of laser focused purposes. Then on, are you doing it right or not? I think the question really comes down to the moment in history you're in and who are the stakeholders that are going to hold you accountable to those things. And of course, really echoing what Anna says, the more transparent you can be internally and externally, the more you can really hold, make tough decisions around your purpose, to make sure that you don't do things that dilute it. Or don't do things that are contrary to it, even if they may be profitable. Those, I think, are going to be what will set you up to win.
That's a good segue. I mean, tough decisions. So Anna, I was going to ask you, obviously, about some of the work that got you to be a Meaningful Business 100 leader. I mean, in The Guardian, the big moment when they decided to ban all oil and gas ads. Tell us a bit about that and the work at The Guardian, obviously, that was submitted for your amazing win or allocation of being a leader.
So I think this is a good example of many of the things that Tom was talking about. It was not an easy decision, and it wasn't made quickly, precisely because there were competing views which were completely legitimate within the organization, and there were concerns about taking it as a stand. And I think that there are rational reasons for taking a decision like that, in a sense that there was pushback from kind of readers and from sort of, there was internal pushback that we had to listen to. There was this sort of incredible stand that had been taken editorially around the climate emergency, and how much that had resonated with readers, and how much that had resonated from a point of generating support really around the world. And so there was a concern that on the one hand, if editorial took such a lead and took such a stand and was so committed really to kind of journalism around the environment and around the emergency, didn't the whole organization have to be consistent with that in order to not be hypocritical or not be essentially sort of, I think, undermining the trust of readers, particularly readers that were giving us money? So there are rational reasons for doing it, which are sort of, there's a sort of, in a sense, it's a shield against, these accusations that you're not living up to the sort of what you've committed to on one half of the organization. And there are emotional reasons for doing it, which are, it seems to be the right thing to do. But equally, there are rational reasons not to do these decisions. There were concerns about revenue. There are concerns precisely about, can you draw a line between some companies and not other companies? If you say that you're not going to take advertising from fossil fuel extractive industries, does that mean you can take advertising from airlines or car manufacturers? And that in the end became the essence of the debate that could you legitimately draw a line between some organizations and other organizations, which would allow you to still accept advertising while taking a stand about what advertising it was that you took. And that was a debate. And in the end, and as I say, there was rationality to that debate, data, sort of kind of risk management, etc. And there was also emotion about what we believed in, what we felt was right for the brand, less quantifiable reasons for doing something. And in the end, the balance of the argument came to the fact that it was a worthy decision to make, and that the positives about it as a decision would outweigh the negatives. And so it proved to be, which was actually when it was made, the sort of the feedback from readers, the response from other advertisers, the response from activists was incredibly positive. And indeed, I think there wasn't the same sort of sense of kind of concern about this undermining an entire advertising proposition, because in the end, it actually brought clarity, because we could actually define why we took some ads and why we didn't take others. But I think that there are always trade-offs in any of these decisions. I don't think they are necessarily easy. I think having a purpose gives you some framework for those discussions, but it doesn't make the decisions straightforward. There are always competing interests, and there are always reasons not to do those things. And so in the end, you weigh up the risks, and you weigh up the benefits, and in the end you make a leap of faith. And then you then draw strength from when you get positive feedback, which I think is also one of the essences of why this event is happening today and why everybody is gathered here today, because I think you draw strength from the community community and the feedback that you get and the support that you get. And that's why this matters, I think, as a conversation.
I think, you know, from looking, it was so brave. I think the bravery of making that decision was, everyone was it was celebrated a lot. So, Tom, let me ask you about what's happening in TerraCycle and Loop. We know, I think people on the call will be interested to see what's next. What are the big things you're doing?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, it's quite interesting what's happening, especially now as we've lived through a proper year of the pandemic, and we're going to clearly extend that into next year to some degree. This has created sort of a very interesting moment in the world of recycling, reuse, and the environment. From the environmental standpoint, I'd actually argue the pandemic is quite positive. It's the first time in our sort of, let's call it consumerist history, that started in the 1950s, where we've actually seen emission levels go down year over year. Smog levels are down, animals have retreated where they haven't been before. This is all creating wonderful tailwind to the environmental movement, noting the big asterisk that during the pandemic, health and safety are more important, and post-pandemic recession recovery will be more important. But nevertheless, there's this great tailwind around being purposeful around the environment, and it's manifested in many sort of exciting ways. Like, for example, the turnout, for example, around the Black Lives Matter protests all around the world was exceptionally greater, and especially of folks that are not of color, versus identical situations that happened 5 and 10 years before. I mean, literally identical ones where the turnouts were different. People are really craving purpose, and there's really a enlightenment happening around the environmental movement, which is wonderful. The challenge, on the flip side of that is the recycling systems that are out there are continuing to degrade, and they're degrading because the business model around recycling continues to weaken with low oil prices and markets not being there, and so on. So there's this great sort of challenge occurring where people are waking up more and more to these topics, especially in our world, the waste topic, and yet the systems that are helping them to be more sustainable are degrading. For TerraCycle, specifically in our little world, we focus on recycling hard to recycle materials. So that has been explosive. It's been, people are leaning in more. I mean, during the pandemic, 30% increase in disposable consumption per capita, which is absolutely nuts. Not just your face masks and gloves, but takeaway food packaging, more cleaning agents, things of that nature. So we're seeing a lot of, increased interest in recycling, and you're going to see more and more programs. We've launched the TerraCycle Foundation, which is now doing substantial work out in Thailand and soon India, in Thailand doing river cleanups. And then, of course, we have Loop, which is our new sort of major platform that is recently launched in the UK with Tesco in July, making that the third country where it's operational, France and the US being the first two. And you're going to see launches in Canada, Germany, Japan, Australia, all before the middle of next year. And the big news in that particular platform, for anyone who may not know it, Loop is a sort of global reuse platform for brands and retailers to enable reusable consumption in a way that is as easy for all stakeholders as possible. We are now seeing retailers start going in store. So Carrefour in France has started rolling out Loop in their physical stores. You're going to see Tesco do the same in May next year. Kroger, Walgreens in the US in spring and summer, respectively. And we've also recently announced partnerships with retailers, QSR, quick serve restaurants like Burger King, Tim Hortons, McDonald's, and so on. So we've seen the momentum really, really grow in all of these topics. But I think beyond sort of sharing, sort of some pretty amazing updates on what's happening, I think the key learning I can share to the folks on the phone here, who are all looking to, everyone here is a practitioner, a meaningful practitioner in the world of purpose, is the biggest lesson I've learned in doing this for about 20 years now in the universe of waste is that the more we lead these ideas not on the purpose of why they exist, but on what benefit they bring that can be traditionally measured, the higher chance we have of two things occurring, of the idea maintaining and replicating and growing. I'll give just one example on this and then conclude. We created diaper recycling over 10 years ago, and we showed it to many companies, and we couldn't really get that much traction for it. And we were doing that because we were leading by purpose. We were saying diapers represent 3% of landfills. It's a huge waste stream. They're not recyclable anywhere. We've invented a solution to how to collect and process them. Isn't that wonderful? But then the entire value proposition was on the back of do the right thing. When we reframed it to, wait a minute, we can make whoever engages in diaper recycling be a way for them to win, increase their market share. And it's not that anyone's going to buy more diapers, but the question that is open to a consumer, are you going to buy brand A or brand B or brand C? You're definitely not going to buy more diapers no matter how excited you are about the concept of diapers, right? And so by reframing it in, as this is a way to drive market share, and how you can beat the competition and really demonstrate something on your P&L. In this example, the brand Pampers really saw it and not just deployed it, but is scaling it. And so, the big lesson we've learned, we even teach this to our sales organization who's out there trying to convince companies to join into TerraCycle and Loop. We say, if your customer says, I'm going to do this, whatever this is, because it's the right thing to do, while that may sound really good, it's actually a bad sign. Because what it says is that I'm only doing this because of the moral imperative. I'd figured out no other good reason to do it other than, that it's the right thing to do, which means that when that person, that awesome person who agreed, moves to the next role and is no longer in the decision-making chair, the next person who comes in, who may just look at that activity on how does it drive my P&L, or maybe, our business is constraining, we have to think a little differently, will likely cut it and will definitely not grow it. But if you do the opposite, if the company really understands that this purposeful activity can help them in the way they see the world, which is maybe as benign as increase their profit, then you don't even have to worry. It will naturally grow on its own. Because the big lesson here is, I think all people, whether they work in, big oil, per Anna's, previous example, or big tobacco in the one that I mentioned before, people are generally good people. They're not evil people who work in those organizations. They're not, criminals. They're wonderful people. They just have tough KPIs to deal with, tough systems that they've inherited. But they want to be able to move the world in a better way. They just have to work within the constraints that they're presented in their roles. And so the more we can empathize with that, I think the more we can embed purpose into driving business than just benign things like TV commercials that don't move the world forward in any way other than just sharing a marketing message of some kind.
That goes on to the next question. Good, Tom. So Anna, let's ask you, what are the, the kind of learnings that you'd want to share with people on the call? Good, bad?
Don't expect things to be easy, I think. I think that you have to marshal, if you are trying to kind of affect change, if you're trying to address particular decisions, then I think you have to marshal both data and emotion. So I think that there is, coming back to this there is a storytelling piece here, which is you have to kind of take people with you. And I also think you have to kind of use data in the right way. And I think Tom makes the point very well. You fundamentally have to explain what the benefit is, not just the emotional why. And I think it's tempting to fall into this, it's the right thing to do, essentially. And that's often why it gets caught up in brand, because brand's an easy way to hide behind, it's like good for the brand, etc. Which of course might be true, but I think you can't just use that. It's not sufficient. You have to have a rational justification. There has to be a coherent argument about why it's a good thing to do and a beneficial thing to do, as well as the right thing to do. So I think it's utilize all of the different kind of levers that you have around storytelling, and don't give up if you fundamentally can't make the decision or discussion go your way immediately, because these things often take time and people change their minds.
I like don't give up, keep going. It's all about timing. Tom, do you have any more tips and tricks that you want to share with the group?
I want to really build on what Anna said, is that I think that what's so important in especially purpose-driven organizations, which is, another way to say it is that it's trying to facilitate purpose in the context of business. So purpose first, and then do that at a profit, right? It's really important to, if you have a good purpose that you can hone on to, and your team members, your investors, your stakeholders can really all believe in that, then you have a wonderful nucleus that is a stable nucleus on top of which you can build a lot of excitement, and so it's really important to lock in on whatever is that sort of core purpose that you have, honor it greatly, like don't compromise on it, and then make that sort of the laser focus, through which you proceed. Now, purpose is going to get you into meetings. One of the amazing things about purpose is that while it is not seen on a P&L, it has phenomenal power. It opens doors like never before at any levels. It attracts wonderful talent to the organization. It has, the media want to write about you more. Media is always going to want to write about purposeful businesses much more than benign, non-purposeful businesses. And I can keep going on examples where it's quantifiably very, very valuable, as long as you are authentic to your purpose. If you start degrading that, then all those extra benefits go away, because that news will spread very quickly through those ecosystems. Now, if you are going after someone, because in all these cases we have to convince someone, we have to convince some actor to join our cause, right? Whatever that actor may be, whether it's a customer, whether it's an investor, whether it's a volunteer, whatever it may be, whether we're NGO or for-profit, it doesn't matter. We have to convince people to sort of rally to our flag, rally to that sort of central purpose. The best way to do so is, while the purpose will open the doors, is sort of reinforcing, in a way what Anna said and what I was saying earlier is, empathize with the actor you're trying to convince. That doesn't mean, to just say, I understand why you are, why you're focused on the way you are, or why your motivations are the way you are. But one step much deeper, which is, I'm going to walk in your shoes and honor that that's the way you see the world. And then the job of the purposeful actor, or the instigator, whatever we'll call ourselves, is to show that other person that they can achieve their goals by embracing the purpose that we've brought them. So, in concrete examples, because that may be very academic, when we talk to retailers about running recycling programs for whatever waste streams they may be associated to, we frame it in foot traffic driving. Because driving new foot traffic into the store is something they can really clearly understand. They have huge ecosystems that understand exactly what a person walking into the store is worth. It's also communicating to them that we get who you are. Now, I don't care about foot traffic personally at all. I actually wish people would buy less stuff. But if I can frame recycling and foot traffic, then I'm going to have a much better chance of creating success than if I frame it, hey, you retailer, you sell a bunch of stuff and you should really be responsible for the garbage you produce, and shame on you, and here's a way to sort of absolve you of your sins. That's not going to get there. So, in purpose, we have these two things we can play with. We have the carrots and the sticks. Sticks are, hey, you create harm and let us, and by partnering with you, we can help you rid some of that harm, sort of absolve you of your sins, right? But while that is useful, it's much, much more effective, especially if you want long-term scaled systems that don't rely on you having to fight for them every year, if you really focus on the carrot. So for example, in Loop, our reuse platform, the stick is, yes, everyone has big garbage problems, and moving from single-use ecosystems to reusable ones absolutely helps in some way, solve for the garbage issue. But what gets brands crazy excited, and why we've been adding a brand every day, at that crazy pace, is it's all about now you can innovate. By making the package not a cost, but an asset, you can greatly expand your investment into that package and bring about innovation you could never do before. And let me tell you, the organizations, their ears perk up like crazy when you talk about that. What got you in the room may have been, the sustainability aspect, but what's going to get you across the finish line in spades is going to be, how can they lean into what they want to do already by embracing, that idea? And this is, the biggest guidance I could give, and it was a lesson we learned very painfully. So it's one of those learn by fire type lessons, but it took us our first 10 years to figure this out. But when we figured it out and did it, our growth, and we were already, not a startup anymore, really started expanding. And we are now in our biggest growth phase by percent year over year, because of that sort of fundamental embracement of, are we driving the type of value our partners can understand by embracing the purpose that we care about?
I've learned a lot. I want the carrot. I think I need to do more carrots, less sticks. That's brilliant. I'm going to ask a question, just, as we're talking about purpose, and probably ask Tom first, but what brands, real purposeful brands, that inspire you, or do you look up to and think they're doing a really good job?
So, it's funny as you say that, because what was going through my mind as you asked the question was, there is no good product, right? And when I say and brand, I'm going to associate it with a product, because we talk about many different brands, but I'm just going to use it in the world of consumer products. The only good product is one we don't buy, right? Because even if this object, this product we buy was, instead of a vegan burger, made by the most awesome hippie farmers, who pay the best wages ever, in the most sustainable, sort of farming practice that we can conceive of, that plot of land could have been a forest if it wasn't a farm. And so, to me, the things that really inspire me, to answer your question, are brands that are challenging this idea of consumption. Patagonia, very great example where they put out advertisements on "Don't buy my product." But those sort of examples, I really sort of sit up and perk up, because in the end, I don't think anything, for example, we do at TerraCycle or Loop is going to be the answer. The fundamental answer, I think, to all of, especially our, maybe not social atrocities, but environmental challenges, whether it's species extinction or climate change or any of them, the waste crisis, is a fundamental reflection on our association with buying stuff. We just buy way too much stuff. And there is no good answer other than a dramatic reduction. And that's incredibly hard to communicate in the context of business. So any brands who do it are ones who really, for me at least personally, perk up my ears a lot.
So I think that's well said. I would just add to that. I think that any brand that genuinely is trying to do their business in a slightly better way, genuinely, and holding themselves to account about it and striving to get better, deserves some credit. So in the context of the fact that I agree that I think there's the fundamental kind of capitalism and consumerism is something that we probably need to move away from. If within that you're trying to do it in the better way and you're genuinely committed to that, and you're paying attention to what others are doing, you're being inspired by what others are doing, you're drawing sort of strength from the community of people who are trying to do it better, then that deserves sort of kind of I think recognition. And then beyond that, I remain a huge believer in the purpose of news organizations who in the end tell the stories and hold power to account. And I think that remains the role of journalism within society, and truth, etc. I think is probably an important thing to recognize as we all try and be better, but also recognize that there are facts and there are truths, and we need to sort of stand by those.
I think I have time for one last. I'll ask Tom back questions, but end on hope. So what do you, Tom, hope for the future? Kind of what are your big hopes for the world?
So my hope is that we can reflect on, the fact that this idea of modern consumption is something that is incredibly modern. We've only been in it in 70 years, this idea of gouging ourselves on stuff. And we are all addicted, myself included, by the way. I have a very hard time with how to reduce consumption. But what gives me hope is that we've only entered this phase in the 1950s. We're only in it, not even a full lifetime. So to me, I have a lot of hope that it can be a temporary phase in our, as we, create our society and look into the future. And my hope is that, and it's increased because I think more and more people are seeing that and may reflect on a new way to exist that's not just tied to our accumulated amount of stuff.
Great. Anna?
I mean, I'm hopeful that Trump is finally about to leave the White House, and and I'm hopeful that out of the kind of the worst of years, some good can come.